There's so much going on in national news. It's always good to talk with a congressman about some of those issues and more. And that's what we're doing right now here with Springfield's Morning News. I'm Greg Bishop on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk. Here are just a few of the headlines. FBI, State Department missed deadline to produce COVID origin information to House panel. COVID-19 could stem from risky experiments at Chinese lab, according to Fauci. You've also got the banking sector with headlines like Biden saying the banking system is safe amid fallout from SVB collapse. Federal Reserve promises review of Silicon Valley Bank collapse. And even a headline like this, panel subpoenas files of Hunter Biden's associates. Not to mention the war in Ukraine and what China is looking to do there. So all of that and more, just some of what we're going to talk about now with my next guest, U.S. Representative Darin LaHood, joining us on WMAY. Congressman, thanks for taking time. And let's, I guess, start with the banking industry. That seems to be at the top of mind for a lot of people. What's the latest there?
Well, Greg, thanks for having me on. We had a hearing, I should say a briefing last night with all of the Republican members of Congress. Obviously, this is very concerning, and we must make sure that our financial markets are stable and that our small businesses and workers aren't left feeling the negative consequences of the decisions that are not in their control. Obviously, the other part of that, too, Greg, is we have to ensure that taxpayers are also not on the hook for poor decisions made by executives at these banks and financial companies. And the bottom line for me is the reality is that many in Illinois are struggling under the Biden administration's failed economic policies. And I think we've seen that with the failure of this bank. And we have to redouble our efforts on reducing inflation and allowing small businesses to thrive. And you can't do that by continuing to bail out banks. And so obviously there's nothing legislatively that has been put in front of us, but it's concerning to see something like this happen.
Congressman, when we talk about the banking sector, there's obviously a lot of concern about the dollars that are going to be used here. We've seen some criticism from even the likes of Nikki Haley, running as the one of the contenders in the GOP nomination, saying that while Biden says this isn't being funded by taxpayers, it is being funded by banks that are healthy. That are going to essentially all the fees they pay go into this. How does that play out in the network of our financial system? Are we having bad banks be bailed out by good banks essentially?
Well, I think that's what we're looking at here. Exactly what the Biden administration is doing, and I think we have to stay alert, Greg. But what I'm hopeful that this is an isolated incident and that we'll not have kind of a cascading effect on other banks and on our economy. And so trying to decipher if this is an isolated incident, that's our responsibility in Congress to do that. But the one thing I think we want to be careful about is federalizing our banking system by the federal government putting their thumb on the scale. And frankly, that worries me with the Biden administration.
Congressman Darin LaHood with us on WMAY. Let's talk about the origins of COVID-19. We've seen some interesting headlines, everything from the energy departments to even the FBI pointing towards the lab leak theory as likely. What is the latest on, are we going to see details of the lab leak theory or the origins of COVID-19? Talk about the efforts to declassify all this information.
Yeah, well, our hope is we will. Let's not forget, Greg, we had well over 1 million Americans that died because of COVID, 4 million worldwide. How do you prevent a future pandemic when you don't know the genesis of this one? And that's what we're trying to get to the bottom of. Last week, we heard from FBI Director Wray and his comments confirming what most people speculated, that there's that this most likely came from a lab leak in Wuhan. Frankly, Republicans have been saying that for 3 years now. We did vote in the House last week to declassify that information. I think that's a positive thing. On the House Intelligence Committee where I serve, Greg, I've been working with Dr. Brad Winstrup. He's a member of Congress. He leads our COVID-19 Origins Working Group, and he helped issue an unclassified report on the origins of COVID. The unclassified report indicated the belief that COVID-19 spilled out of the lab, and China, was aware of that, and they had been part of a bioweapons program that had been done at the lab. So when you see stuff like that is slowly trickling out and being declassified, it causes people to say, well, why didn't this come out 3 years ago? Where was the government? The other part that I think has been revealing is just the deceptiveness of the Chinese government, the CCP, right? They have lied at every level. They lied to the World Health Organization. They originally said COVID was, brought forth by the U.S. military. They lied about the number of deaths they've had there. And so they cannot be trusted in this is the bottom line. And if they truly have nothing to hide about the origins, they would have opened up their area for investigation for the world and public to see, and they haven't done that.
Congressman, you mentioned China, of course, a lot of questions about what their role is going to be in the war in Ukraine with Russia's incursion. There was word this morning I saw highlighted that Xi Jinping is set to talk with Ukraine's president. What's going on here?
Well, they're contemplating giving aid to Putin. And remember, the number one ally that Putin has had in this illegal and unprovoked war in Ukraine is Xi Jinping. He talks about it as a unbreakable bond with Putin. And that should be disturbing to everybody. As you've seen, most of the world has been isolated against Putin and his brutal, again, illegal and unprovoked war in Ukraine. And I think it goes to a whole nother level if he decides to either visit Putin and give him support or give lethal aid here. So that's definitely going to up that. So there's a lot of people watching that, including us. And I think there'll be action taken in terms of secondary and other sanctions that could be put on China. And you could get into an economic trade war with China also. That's something they can't afford to have right now.
What's your position on America's involvement in Ukraine? Should we continue to provide material? Should we have boots on the ground there? What's your take?
Well, we definitely shouldn't have boots on the ground there. Listen, I supported the initial amount of money that supported Ukraine. That was a bit controversial, but I thought it was justified to fight Putin there and not in other places in Europe and not in the United States. Plus, Putin, there's nothing more that Putin and Xi Jinping or Iran would like to see than the West lose in Ukraine. But Ukraine was an independent, sovereign, prosperous country that was invaded illegally. That's number one. Now, I did not support the second tranche of money in December of this last year, which was another $45 billion in taxpayer money. And the reason why I didn't support it, Greg, was not because I didn't support the war. It's because we have to have accountability on federal taxpayer money. There has been no audit. There's been no accountability. We have to have a system that can track the money that's going to Ukraine. So I couldn't support it the second time around. And so I think we got to make sure that this money is being spent wisely. And the other part is our European allies that have much more at stake here have to step up more and spend more money there. But this is going to continue to be an issue. This Congress, I hope with Republicans in charge of the House, we can bring some transparency and openness in terms of the accountability of these dollars.
Congressman Darin LaHood, we've been touching on all kinds of topics here. Greatly appreciate your time. One last thing, you revealed last week in a hearing that you were the subject of an FBI query when it comes to conversation about the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. From my understanding, some elements of FISA are going to be expiring at the end of this year. What happened? What did you find out? And what needs to change with the FBI?
Well, I think your listeners need to realize, first of all, FISA, which is as you referenced, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, passed post 9/11, put in place so that our intelligence services can monitor terrorists in foreign lands, adversaries in foreign lands, and people that want to hurt America. 96% of what FISA does deals with foreign entities. But what we found out let me back up. In December, the Office of Director of National Intelligence Inspector General released a semi-annual report on the misuses of FISA back in 2019 and 2020. Buried in a footnote in that report, Greg, an intelligence analyst supposedly queried in 702 the name of a U.S. congressman. After reviewing this classified summary, it became my opinion that member of Congress who was wrongly queried was in fact myself. And so I raised that last week. And what I said is the Department of Justice found that these queries by the FBI were inappropriate, non-compliant, and a violation. And so I confronted Director Wray with the FBI. I'm glad that he acknowledged in a public hearing that these abuses in the FISA system are inappropriate and they must do a better job. Now, the bottom line is every 5 years, Greg, we have to reauthorize FISA. So we have to do that by the end of the year. I'm in charge of the working group by Speaker McCarthy to do this. And so we have a lot of work to do to give confidence to the American people that this program is not spying on Americans, is not querying Americans, and get to the bottom of it. And so it underscores the need to work with the Intelligence Committee and the Judiciary Committee to reform FISA and protect our civil liberties.
Congressman Darin LaHood, not the last time we're going to talk for sure. Greatly appreciate your time. Be safe, and we'll talk soon, okay?
Always good to be with you, Greg. Take care.
Springfield's Morning News on 92.7 WMAY. And